morning. Our opening words this morning are by the Reverend Katie Kandarian Morris. She writes, "Here we have come into this sacred place, quieter now with our readiness, hushed voices, hoping, trusting for so many things, for connection, for communion, for inspiration, for information, for healing, for wholeness, for words, for music, for celebration and consolation. Here we have come into this space, bringing all of who we are. Let us be willing, however we are changed." And I invite you now to join us in the unison chalice lighting found in your order of service. O flame of our faith, open our hearts and fill our bodies and souls with persistent strength. Enliven our spirits and engage us deeply in this life of ours, this sacred, essential moment now.
While the singers in our choirs come up front for our opening hymn, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that the words to the chorus are in the order of service, and you sing the one on the left-hand side twice when I cue you, and on the right-hand side also when I cue you. I think many of you know these words, but please join along in strongly.
the Reverend Amy Friedman. I serve as your Minister of Religious Education. And today I'd like to share a wisdom story with you that was written by my colleague, the Reverend Naomi King. And it's similar to that anthem we just sang, because once there was a seeker who went down a long and winding road, and they came to a community in the desert seeking wisdom. And the one who answered the door welcomed the seeker and asked how the community could help. The seeker replied, "Wisdom. I want wisdom." "Excellent," replied the doorkeeper. "Tell me, do you know how to weave baskets?" "Oh, I've never woven a basket in my life." "Why? What does that have to do with wisdom?" "Well, we weave baskets here. You will need to weave basket to stay." So the seeker stayed, having no idea to weave baskets, but watched and asked questions and learned. And after some time, the seeker's baskets were fine and wonderful. The doorkeeper then returned to the seeker. "Did you find what you're looking for?" I know how to weave a basket now. So if I find some wisdom lying around, I guess I could put it in my basket." "Oh, well then," said the doorkeeper, "I have a question for you." The seeker waited, wondering if this would be the question of all questions that would unlock the hidden mystery of wisdom. The doorkeeper asked the seeker, "Do you know how to grow mustard greens?" "I have never grown a mustard green in my life," replied the seeker. "Well, we grow mustard greens here. You'll need to join the others to stay and find wisdom." So the seeker stayed, having no idea how to grow mustard greens, and a little suspicious that maybe this was a trick of the community in order to get some free labor. But after a while, the seeker was too busy learning how to grow mustard greens. "Did you find what you were looking for?" the doorkeeper asked. "Well, I know how to weave a basket, and I know how to grow mustard greens to put in the basket, but I'm not so sure about wisdom yet." "Well then," said the doorkeeper, "I have just one more question for you." "Wait! Whatever it is, I am not sure I want to learn anything new. I understand we have to be ready to learn. It takes time to learn well, and just as the basket and the mustard greens, I understand that others have plenty to teach, and this is the way we grow in wisdom, isn't it?" "Yes," said the doorkeeper, "but do you know how to make garlic and greens soup?" "You are jesting," said the seeker. "Of course I know how to make garlic and greens soup. You see, my grandmother taught me, and my parents are great at making that kind of soup, and I come from a whole village that's famous for our garlic and greens soup." "Excellent," said the doorkeeper. "Would you mind teaching us?" Thus ends my wisdom story. We have something important to do today, and that is to thank someone very special in our community who's been with us a while, and that is Brendan Ferrari. I want to ask you to come forward, please. And Beth is going to join us up here. I was so grateful to have you join us at a time that was very different in our community. You were here to teach our children, and then we went completely online. But I remember so many special moments in which you shared your gifts with all of us, and I hope that we also taught you some things along the way, too.
Thank you.
You need to know that Brendan was hired in May of 2020 to lead our children's choir when we were imagining that we were all going to go back to the way it always was. And one of the wonderful things about working with you, Brendan, is that every time the winding road has brought us to another intersection that has been very different from what we expected it to be and what you had expected to be. And we said, well, could you do it this way? You'd go, sure. And really, that's what he would say. You'd say, sure. And you'd figure it out, and you'd work with us. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with you and have you in this community and leading our children, both in RE and in music and worship, and in leading us in worship. And so we wanted to take this moment to just thank you for these 3 quite extraordinary years, and for your flexibility and your friendship and your dedication. And we hope you won't be a stranger. And this is a small token of our esteem and appreciation. And I just think all of us should say amen and applaud. And now would you lead us in the anthem?
here, the Animal Adventures, has come to do a program in the chapel. So if you are a young person, now's our time to exit this way to the chapel. Please follow me.
This may sound odd coming from your interim minister when the work of interim ministry is so much about change, but I do not like change. I am someone who very much likes rituals and keeping things the same. When I was a kid, my parents used to joke, you do something with Seth once, and it's a tradition. While I have loosened up some as I've gotten older, you can still see that preference in me for keeping things the same without having to look too hard at my life. We live in a neighborhood without any major streets to cross. Important context. And so when I walk our dogs every morning, there's a huge number of ways we could walk in our 10-block radius of quiet neighborhood. And yet, when I go, we go the same way every time. Now, when my spouse walks the dogs in the evening, they go they do all sorts of stuff. They wander. It's when I go with them, it's like, whoa, it's all discombobulating. Not me. When I walk around the block with the dogs, we walk around the same block, our block, every time. And I don't even change the direction we go. Out the front door and to the right, traveling clockwise every time. No going counterclockwise on my watch. So for all of you out there who are not fans of change, trust me, I can empathize. I like my daily rituals. I like things that stay the same. If only life worked that way. Everything changes all the time, and wow, does that really irritate me sometimes? Change often pushes me out of my comfort zone. The interim ministry period, 2 years between settled ministers, is actually supposed to be like that. I am supposed to try to push you all a little bit out of your comfort zone as we work on implementing some necessary changes prior to the arrival of your next settled minister. So kind of ironic that me, someone who doesn't like change in my own life, has signed up to do interim ministry and intentionally bring the discomfort of change to all of you. The change that happens during interim ministry is really important work, though. There's a reason that after decades and decades of experience with ministerial transitions, the recommended best practice in our denomination is to do a 2-year interim ministry. If you all fully engage in the process, interim ministry can be a rich and fertile time in the life of a congregation. Now, as much as I don't like change, when I step out of the comfort I find in doing the same rituals every day, and I look at the big picture, it's not hard to see that the discomfort of change is vital to life. I would go so far as to say that change is life itself. Because for as much comfort as I find in doing things the same way, nothing ever changing is not life. It's actually death. Unless barriers are put in their way preventing it, things that are alive grow. Without barriers or human or intervention, plants just grow and grow and grow. Even concrete can't keep them down. Give a seed or a root system even a tiny crack in the pavement, and we all know what happens, right? Those plants just keep shooting up. Life is change and growth and things being different and circumstances changing. There is no way to avoid it. Even things that seem permanent to us in our relatively brief lives in the span of planetary time, they change over time, Rocks worn down like by water. Hello, Grand Canyon, right? Life is change. And I'm not just saying that everything changes all the time. I'm saying that the good parts of being alive involve change. Most of us would get really bored in our lives if nothing ever changed. It would be hard to find and make meaning. Everything that feels more permanent, like marriages or lifelong friendships or church communities, right? We've been around since 1636. Even those change and form and function over time. As people learn and grow, as people experience loss and trauma, as theology changes, as our culture changes. Change is what gives life meaning. If nothing changed, living would not be good. An unchanging world is not actually one I want to live in. Which is not to say that change is easy, even if we embrace the idea that it's important or central. I mean, some change is easy. If we don't like the status quo, when we have problems with how things currently are, then some change, especially change for what we see as the better, that is often welcome. But so often, change feels thrust upon us. And especially when we really like how things currently are, change can feel unwelcome. We have all experienced this with a pandemic in some shape or form. Unwanted change imposed on us by COVID-19. That's basically been Brendan's entire experience with us. Our lives have been disrupted. This community has been disrupted. It's all really unsettling and often uncomfortable. And then on top of all that, you have an interim minister coming in and changing even more stuff. Eesh. Whoever that poor guy is, I feel bad for him, trying to come in and change things in the middle of a pandemic that has already forced so much change on you. Someone should have told him that adding change on top of change is likely to make people cranky. One of the best ways I've found to try to manage my own experience of change is by focusing on the underlying values that I want to carry forward and focusing on relationships. Let me tell you the story of a church located in the heart of Washington, D.C. to illustrate what I mean. So there's this church, and I really wish I remembered what denomination it was, but that's okay, it doesn't really matter. There's a church in Washington, D.C. that had a long-standing tradition. One of the most important things to them was having an all-church dinner every week, Wednesday evening, and sitting down and sharing a meal and spending time together. But what they realized over a period of several years was that traffic was getting worse and worse, and they had more and more folks who were coming from outside the center part of the city where they were located, and they weren't able to gather in the same way, and it wasn't working. It was clear that this thing, this tradition, this ritual that was so important to them, so central to the life of the church, was broken, and that they didn't have an easy way to fix it. And so what they did was they sat down and thought about what was most important to them about that tradition. Not the form of it, but the values, the things that matter to them that they carry forward. And they decided to figure out a different way to carry those values forward. And the values were sitting down and spending time together and sharing a meal. That was what was important to them about the time. And so what they shifted to was what they called the zip code dinners. They found a place in each of the zip codes around D.C., Washington, D.C., and they had smaller dinners. It wasn't the same. It wasn't an all-church gathering. But they had zip code dinners on Wednesday evenings moving forward, where they got together in groups that were easier to travel to and easier for people to show up to. And they continued the tradition of what was important to them, even as it took a different form and practice. And so that's a lesson I try to carry with me as I navigate life and all the changes that do happen, even as I like my little rituals of sameness. I try and find the things, the values, the underlying values that are important and see if I can carry them through. And I try and maintain the relationships, even as the people I'm in relationship with change, even as the circumstances change around us. I try and hold on to those things, even as the change is happening. Now, there are, of course, other things that can help with managing our experience of change too, like taking the time to grieve the loss of what was. Because sometimes even happy changes can bring up feelings of loss and grief in us. For example, getting married is usually something that's exciting for most people, embarking on a new chapter of their lives with someone they care about. But for some folks, it can also bring about some sadness of the loss of the life that was. Or becoming a parent, right? That's usually also a happy experience for a lot of folks. But it can also bring about grief about the loss of freedom previously enjoyed or other losses. And so whether the changes that are coming into our life are welcome changes or not, taking the time to grieve our feelings of loss for what was can be really helpful. Now, of course, the quantity of change also matters. Too much change all at once can feel overwhelming and destabilizing, like there isn't any firm ground for us to stand on. I imagine that many of us have felt that overwhelm over the past few years, because I sure have. And in those times, we do need the comfort of the familiar to help get us through. All change all the time would be way too much. I'm not advocating for that either. Finding a healthy balance of change and things staying the same is important. And it can also help if we can manage to, instead of fighting change or resenting change or being angry about it, if we can find a path to embracing it while holding on to the people and values that keep everything connected and grounded. That is a path, in my experience, to a less stressful and maybe even happier life. Now, of course, there are some changes that we should fight. Unjust change, change that causes harms to others, such as the many laws being put into place in our country right now that harm people with marginalized identities. And there's also change that has pluses and minuses, and we need to weigh the benefits of those and try and decide the best path forward. And I invite you, as you can, to find a place of acceptance with the rest of the change. Because change is constant, and our values and our relationships are too. Amen.